Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I'm Riley Hart, former investigative reporter, still lugging this half-crushed cassette deck and the shards of my old press badge across what's left of the Midwest. It's late in the 9th month after the first emergency bulletin, though calendars mean less every sunrise, and this is tape 6. Caleb Reeves, the National Guard veteran who pulled me out of Laurel Ridge, just helped me wedge the recorder into a coat pocket so my cracked ribs don't scream each time I breathe. Deputy Lorna Ames is standing watch at the clinic's front vestibule, pump action balanced against her hip, while my dog Bailey paces between us, nails whispering over linoleum that once smelled of disinfectant instead of rust. 3 nights ago, lightning split Tower 17's antenna and fried the generator Clara DeWitt and I fought so hard to restart. We killed the power, but not before every fuse inside the tuner melted. The tower still stands, black silhouette on the ridge, visible by moonlight, but it can't sing. Static fills the dial where Clara's careful reel of survivor voices should be. Caleb cursed like a drill sergeant until his throat cracked, then said nothing for hours. Lorna stared at the sky the way you look at a broken promise. I wrapped fresh gauze over the bruises left by Cass, Julian and Louis back in the chapel, reminded myself that living means trying again, and started sweeping the airwaves for any sign of spare parts. At 2:17 yesterday, Caleb's field transceiver picked up 8 repeating triage tones on AM 1410. Between the beeps, a recorded female voice listed medical priority codes in the exact order the CDC trained clinics to broadcast during the 2nd week of the outbreak, long before the lines went silent. The signal was weak but steady, tracing back to an old rural hospice outside Ash Hollow, St. Mary's Community Clinic. Its rooftop used to serve volunteer first responders. Rumor said a retired ham operator kept a backup transmitter there, the kind of heavy-duty box that could push our rebuilt programs statewide, maybe farther if we pigtailed it into a proper mast. So we stuffed what little gasoline remained into Caleb's rebuilt Cherokee, drove until the road dissolved into gravel and the sky into pre-dawn violet, then hiked the last 2 kilometers through wet prairie grass. The air smells of wild mint this time of year, a fragrance somehow untouched by decay. Lightning flickered again on a distant horizon, but stayed mute. Under the soft thunder we could hear the faint chime, like the entrance bell of a corner store, every time one of the clinic's motion sensors woke up. Each chime echoed across the empty parking lot, bouncing off rusted ambulances and a faded red cross that someone spray-painted with a crude warning. No cure inside. Turn back. But we didn't turn back. Tower 17 needs a voice. The clinic's automatic doors still opened when Lorna waved her flashlight, drawing a startled yelp from Bailey. A backup battery, solar-fed, powers the entryway and a few hall lights. They glow the same color as old computer monitors, ghostly green, enough to outline dried footprints across the lobby tile. Most lead deeper in. Some stop abruptly in the middle of the floor, like their owners were plucked away mid-stride. I whispered to the tape what I saw so I would never forget. Posters about mask etiquette peeling from corkboards. A child's drawing of a smiling nurse tucked behind shattered safety glass. A plexiglass donation box filled with dust instead of bills. Caleb did a slow crouch the way infantry do before breaching, but nothing lunged at us. The chime rang again, somewhere down the hall. Then again closer. Lorna pointed right. Triage wing. I pointed left. Administrative offices and, according to a faded directory, the radio room. We chose left, figuring we could find the transmitter first and worry about patient records after. But Bailey bristled, ears flattening toward a chapel sign stenciled on a set of double doors. That's when we heard it. A single voice, trembling but steady, reciting the rosary in Latin. Caleb led. His boots nudged aside empty saline bags littering the hallway. We slipped through the chapel doors and found pews pushed against walls to make space for 20 crude cots. Most were empty. A few held shapes under grey wool blankets, motionless. At the far end, a battery lantern glowed beside a weathered woman in a dark blood-speckled habit. She held a rosary in latex-gloved hands the color of candle wax. She looked up, and for a heartbeat I thought she might scream. Instead, she whispered, "You heard the codes." I introduced myself, explained the barter. Caleb lowered his weapon first. Lorna followed. The woman pressed a hand to her chest. "I'm Sister Agnes de Breve," she said. "Registered nurse, Order of St. Camillus, or what's left of it." Her accent carried a trace of the Balkans, softened by decades in Nebraska. She glanced at Bailey and managed the faintest smile. Dogs still trust even now. That must mean something. I offered her our last roll of sterile gauze and a half-dozen adhesive sutures, exactly what Caleb and I could spare without courting infection for my own ribs. Her eyes widened when she saw the bandages. "You must take confession," she said, voice cracking. "Not for sin, but for record." She gestured at my cassette deck. "Your dog is brave. Be braver." So I set the recorder on a pew, pressed the red button, and told her to speak while the hallway outside chimed and chimed. Sister Agnes began in June, back when emergency alerts still insisted the outbreak could be slowed by isolating bite victims, while antivirals were synthesized. St. Mary's volunteered as a comfort hospice, morphine, prayer, and basic palliative care for those waiting to turn. Families needed somewhere gentle, she said, smoothing wrinkles in her habit. At first they admitted 2 patients a day. By the end of week 3, National Guard trucks delivered 20 at a time. The clinic's little solar array kept lights on and powered a surplus Coast Guard transmitter repurposed for triage broadcasts. She learned to read priority codes over the air. Red meant active infection requiring restraint. Yellow meant symptomatic but lucid. Black. She exhaled when she said the last one, cradling the rosary. Black meant irreversible, minutes from death. I did not say the word, only the tone, she murmured, so children listening would not know Mama was gone. When meds ran short, the county promised resupply that never came. Guardsmen rotated out. The last platoon left behind a clipboard full of radio frequencies and a padlock key for the pharma closet. Agnes and 2 volunteers rationed morphine until they were down to single-dose vials. That night, a father forced open the door with a fire extinguisher, begging for one more syringe for his son. He shattered glass, slashing his arm. The wound bled so fast that Agnes used half their gauze to stop it. "He thanked me," she said, then locked himself in the quarantine ward with the boy. When I opened it the next morning, I found only one body. She paused, eyes glistening but no tears fell. "People say fear turned us into monsters," she continued. "I think fear just revealed the fragile wiring we always had." Bailey whined. I scratched behind her ears to calm both of us. Caleb kept scanning the nave for movement. Lorna leaned against a pillar, reading the names stitched onto blanket tags. Some tags matched the triage codes we heard on 1410, each tone a memorial to someone Agnes could no longer protect. She spoke about the day the power grid failed. The only electricity came from sunshine, but the array couldn't run respirators and lights and water filters together. They chose water. Patients wheezed until lungs seized. Those who turned were restrained with leather belts to cots. When belts tore, Agnes resorted to IV lines braided like rope. Finally, she decided no one should wake to the hunger ever again. She prepared each remaining vial, kissed each forehead, and delivered injections while reciting Psalm 23. "I wrote the exact time on their charts," she said. "Documentation. Truth must survive rumor." Afterward, she carried every chart to the radio room, programmed the transmitter to loop the 8-tone sequence, and activated the repeater so the world would at least hear that someone had tried. "Maybe I believed heaven measured intent," she whispered. "Maybe I still do." The cassette whirred. I asked why she stayed when everyone else fled. She answered by turning her lantern toward the altar. Beneath it lay a sealed envelope addressed to any who reclaim this place. Inside, she explained, were the paper charts, each initialed in ink. She wanted them delivered to any functioning archive, government, medical, or broadcast. Even Tower 17, if we ever healed its voice. I told her we could try. We moved next to the radio room, a narrow cell packed with coax coils, a switching console, and the Coast Guard transmitter humming under dusty fans. A digital screen flickered 4 watts output, barely more than a handheld. But Agnes said solar charge had been weak since hail cracked 2 panels last month. Caleb pushed up his sleeves and ran a palm across the casing, like a mechanic greeting an old truck. He whispered specifications: 560 kHz crystal, low RPM fan, modular step-up transformer. Translation: with a new fuse bank and proper antenna, this little beast could feed Tower 17's dead heart. The hitch was power. To detach the rig, we had to shut down the clinic's inverter, and that inverter also fed the magnetic door locks, separating us from the triage wing. Agnes warned that half a dozen restrained infected still lurked there, the belts long rotted. The locks were the only barrier. We would have roughly 5 minutes to pull the transmitter, haul it to the Cherokee, and run a bypass line that kept the locks engaged. Fail, and the doors would slide open like theatre curtains. Caleb said, 5 minutes is a lifetime if you plan. Lorna disagreed. It's a blink if something jams. I weighed both truths while pressing a fresh battery into the recorder. Bailey watched me with that choose look, dog's master. I chose action. Agnes insisted she come. My sins, my burden, she said, lifting a crowbar she kept by the console. I told her penance could wait, but she wouldn't yield. We settled on a roll. She would guide us through maintenance corridors that bypassed main halls, unlocking only 2 service hatches instead of every clinic door. We rehearsed the route twice in whispers, traced flashlight beams along fuse boxes, marked red tape on handles we must not twist. Caleb tied a nylon rope to the transmitter chassis so he and I could drag while Lorna covered the rear with a suppressed carbine. Suppressors don't make gunfire silent, but they shave off the bark, enough maybe to keep the hall sensors below trip threshold. At 13:03 by my cracked watch, Agnes shut down the inverter. The overhead lights died. Emergency diodes glowed red. Somewhere beyond the triage wing, a recorded door chime gasped and fell silent. For the first time since we arrived, the building held its breath. Caleb counted aloud. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. By 6 we had the transmitter unbolted. Wires sparked as he clipped them. I smelled scorched dust. Agnes opened the first service hatch. Cool air smelling of bleach curled out. We muscled the unit through, Bailey squeezing past with her pack rattling. At 12, Caleb's rope snagged on a filing cabinet. He cursed under his breath, sawed it free. At 15, we reached the inverter room, a concrete closet behind radiology, where a spiderweb of cables fed the locks. Lorna had memorized which breaker powered the doors. She flipped it off, spliced copper with pliers, and bridged the circuit using our last spare battery so the magnets would stay closed once we reignited the array. 20 seconds is a long time when you're sure skinless hands might scrape steel any moment. Caleb called time. 19:30. We were ahead. Relief tasted like copper on my tongue. Then the PA crackled to life, unpowered yet alive. A fragment of Agnes's own triage loop bled through every speaker, slowed to a crawl by dying voltage. The tones disintegrated into a shriek of feedback that set Bailey barking. Lorna spun, gun raised. Through the fuse room grate we heard locks disengage with a thunk that rattled my ribs more than any punch from Cass back in that chapel. The magnets were starved before her bypass finished charging. Doors open, Caleb hissed. Down the hallway something collided with a gurney. Wheels squealed. A wet groan rolled toward us, followed by a second, hungrier one. Agnes's knuckles whitened around the crowbar. She whispered a prayer in Bulgarian. I shoved the cassette recorder deeper into my jacket pocket so the mic would keep rolling no matter how hard I ran, then grabbed the transmitter's rope. Caleb yanked his end. The unit clanged across the floor, sparks flying where a bracket scraped tile. We dragged it through the inverter doorway just as silhouettes lurched into view, hospital gowns hanging like shredded sails, eyes reflecting red diode glow. The first one reached the threshold, jaw snapping on nothing but air inches from Lorna's barrel. She fired once, low. The round punched through a shin. The infected collapsed, crawling with arms that left greasy handprints. We kept hauling. Bailey darted forward, teeth bared, backing the crawler just enough for Caleb to swing the inverter door shut. No lock. He jammed a metal chair under the handle and turned. "Move!" We did. Transmitter skidding, hearts hammering. No, scratch that. I promised myself I'd record truth, not tired cliches. So let me say, every instinct screamed conserve breath, conserve silence, conserve life expectancy down to the nanosecond. We reached the loading dock corridor. Daylight slanted through broken windows, silver motes swirling. Just 20 yards more and we'd ditch the clinic forever. But something big banged open behind us. The triage doors. Maybe the chair slid or the handle snapped. Footsteps drummed. How many? Hard to say over the transmitter scraping. Lorna peeled off a burst of 3 rounds, each muffled pop echoed by snarls. Caleb and I heaved the rig onto a dented supply cart. Wheels protested but rolled. Agnes stumbled, winded. I grabbed her elbow. She shook her head, mouthed go, but I held tight. 15 yards, 10. Bailey sprinted ahead through sunbeams that made her fur look gold instead of mud brown. She vanished around the dock's corner, barking a warning I felt in my sternum. Then Sister Agnes slipped. Her shoe skated on a puddle of spilled disinfectant, knees buckling. She fell onto a collapsed privacy curtain. The crowbar clattered away. Behind us, infected flooded the hall like a tide of hospital gowns. Caleb shouted my name. I dove, caught Agnes's wrist. For a beat, we were a frozen tableau. Me straining, transmitter tipping, Lorna's boots skidding as she tried to anchor the cart, the dead rushing forward in a wave that smelled of iodine and decay. And in that instant, the cassette tape inside my recorder ticked past the 30-minute mark, a point where side A would soon run out. Part of my mind registered it, the cold arithmetic of magnetic tape length versus human endurance. That's when something enormous slammed into the opposite dock door from outside. Wood splintered. A daylight silhouette appeared, bipedal, tall, swinging metal. For a heartbeat I thought raiders. Then the figure yelled, "Move, radio freaks!" and crashed through. The daylight silhouette that burst through the loading dock door resolved, second by second, into a lean man wrapped in a rain-spattered canvas work coat 2 sizes too large. Mud streaked the hem, and a leather arc-welding shield sat on his forehead like a knight's half-visor, crude tape holding the cracked hinge. He moved with the urgent economy of someone who had broken into locked buildings for survivors more than once. In his right hand he gripped a galvanized pipe wrench almost as long as my forearm, the kind plumbers use to bully frozen valves, not skulls, yet it rode his palm as naturally as a baton. His first swing swept a plastic mop bucket aside and cleared the doorway. His second swing cut downward with surgical precision, smashing into the sternum of the nearest gown-clad crawler. The infected woman's ribcage imploded with a wet crunch, so sharp I felt it between my teeth. She folded, knees buckling, but the wrenchman didn't waste a heartbeat. He pivoted, boots skidding on bleach residue, and braced the doorway with his shoulder as more shapes lurched down the corridor behind us. "Stairwell's filling with them!" he shouted, voice hoarse but commanding. "Move, move, before that flood reaches the dock!" It wasn't a suggestion. I didn't argue. Caleb and I muscled the transmitter, 80+ kilos of Coast Guard steel and vacuum tubes, down the access ramp. The unit's sharp base plate scraped yellow safety paint from the concrete lip, shrieking like brakes on a hill. Lorna dropped her empty mag, slapped a fresh one home, and snapped the bolt forward with practiced rhythm, while walking backward to cover us. Sister Agnes clutched my bicep, nails like ice through my sleeve, as we half-dragged, half-ran into daybreak that felt absurdly cheerful compared with the reek inside. Outside, the stranger kicked aside loose pallets stacked for a supply delivery that never came, revealing a metal dolly already rigged with cross-hatched bungee cords and half-flat tires. "Saw your rope line through the shattered window," he explained between breaths, nodding at our improvised tow cable. Figured you'd need something with wheels. Caleb grunted affirmation, planted one boot on the ramp edge, and power lifted the transmitter in a single vine-bursting heave while I steadied the dolly. The chassis thumped onto steel, rocking the cart. Lorna jogged backward after us, keeping her muzzle steady on the clinic doors. Glass behind us trembled like a drumhead. Dark shapes hammered at the frames. When Caleb sprinted for the Cherokee, 50 meters across potholes, his footfalls sounded too loud in the open air. Lorna mirrored him, retreating in bounding steps. Carbine stitching controlled bursts into any gown that wandered too close. Bailey circled the cart, hackles up, teeth flashing like ivory daggers every time a croaker moaned. Caleb reached the SUV, jammed the hatch upright so hard it rang, then spun to beckon. Lorna and I shoved. The cart's left wheel stuck on a concrete seam, protesting with a metallic squeal. The stranger crouched, wrenched it free, and together we slid the transmitter into the cargo bay, wedging it between rust-red fuel cans, coiled cokes, and the salvaged antenna rods scavenged earlier. As I secured nylon straps, the stranger tossed a small zip bag toward my chest. Inside lay clean plastic keycaps and micro switches. Scoop these from an intake vent. Kenwood macros looks like. You'll want them when you retune that dinosaur. Finally, a breath. I sucked one in, lungs stinging from bleach vapor. Name? I managed. He flipped the welding shield completely back, revealing sandy stubble plastered with ash, smoke-reddened eyes, and the faint crooked smile of a man counting how many miracles he had left. Milo Roskowitz, he said, voice rasped dry. Volunteer fire crew, Ash Hollow, until the ladder truck sipped its last diesel. He jerked a thumb toward the clinic. Spotted you through binoculars up on the water tower. Anyone crazy enough to lug a transmitter that size isn't here for gauze. Figured you'd want an escort out. Caleb twisted the ignition. The straight-piped engine roared, reverberating off brick. That roar drew a chorus of throaty groans down the corridor. Door glass spiderwebbed, then exploded outward in a rain of cubes. Gowned figures poured into sunlight, arms already peeling from disinfectant burns, eyes catching the light like faulty LEDs. Milo vaulted into the rear seat, sandwiching himself between the transmitter and a jerry can. Agnes slid in next, hugging her crowbar close as though it might absolve sins. Bailey scrambled after me into the middle row, toenails carving denim grooves into my thigh. Caleb slammed the gas. The Cherokee fishtailed, gravel blasting fenders. We shot across the parking lot. The infected kept pace for a few frantic seconds. One older man in a volunteer smock even hooked fingers on the rear wiper before inertia flung him away. A handful smacked the tailgate until distance reduced them to murmuring dots, then dust ghosts. We hit the county road. Asphalt cracked into jigsaw pieces. Caleb finally eased off the throttle enough that wind roar receded. Milo glanced across the seat at the cassette deck still ticking on my lap. His eyebrows lifted. Archive types? He asked. I said, trying to be. He tapped the transmitter's scuffed casing. That slab will give you a 100-watt voice if you feed it right. Ash Hollow's municipal diesel dump sits 4 miles east, just past the Little Platte. Tanks were 3/4 full last inventory. Unless someone's drunk them dry, you'll have juice for months. Caleb's knuckles whitened on the wheel. Antenna first, he said, staring north. No mast, no message. Lorna leaned forward, pointing with the carbine barrel toward distant concrete shapes. Grain silos by Interstate 89. They've got height, and they're grounded into bedrock, should handle storms. I looked back at Agnes. She had closed her eyes. Whether she prayed or simply listened to the tires humming over weather-worn tar, I couldn't tell. Decision time. 3 priorities tangled in my head like frayed audio tape. Mount the transmitter somewhere defendable, refuel before the Cherokee burned fumes, keep our fragile alliance from tearing apart under stress. Tower 17 still waited, its tuner fried, its antenna scarred by lightning, and it needed both amplifier and spare fuses, maybe even that bag of macros. But dragging this iron beast through ridge switchbacks risked everyone on board if the infected or raiders caught our scent. Caleb offered a plan. He and Lorna would drive the transmitter, Agnes and Bailey, toward Tower 17 via the orchard warehouse halfway up the ridge. There they could hide beneath apple trees, rig solar trickle charge, and start swapping fuses. Milo would escort me to the diesel dump, snag enough fuel for a return run, and scout for spare circuit breakers. Or, he proposed, I could follow separate leads, maybe hunt for replacement tower insulators along the rail depot. Options, but time bled fast. Sister Agnes's voice, frail yet iron-hard, sliced through the debate. She said the charts, her sealed envelope holding euthanasia times and names, remained on the chapel altar. Leaving them behind felt like letting the dead fade twice. She turned to me, placed 2 bloodless fingers on my recorder's cracked faceplate. Truth must travel with the witness, she whispered. You bear witness, please. Fuel sloshed low. Gauge needle flirted with red. Caleb met my eyes in the mirror. Delay stalls the rebuild, he warned, but respect flickered beneath the caution. He valued records too, even dark ones. I chose. I would go back on foot with Milo. He knew irrigation ditches, utility corridors, shortcuts carved by volunteer crews during prairie fires. That knowledge plus his emergency badge might open locked sheds. Caleb would push north with Lorna, Agnes, Bailey, and the hardware to the orchard. Bide 48 hours. If I failed to return by dusk on the second day, he'd press on to Tower 17 and hope the ridge kept raiders at bay. Bailey whined when I passed her leash to Lorna. I scratched behind her ear, felt tension seep from her muscles if only slightly. Guard them, I murmured. Her tail thumped once, reluctant but resolute. She understood orders, even hard ones. Her amber eyes didn't leave me as I stepped out near an irrigation culvert choking on cattails. The Cherokee's engine note rose, gravel flung in an arc, and soon only dust swirled over mint-crushed soil. Prairie wind rushed in, cool and smelling of petrichor, to fill the void where my team's voices had been. For the first time since lightning-gutted Tower 17, I stood truly separate. Just Milo beside me, my battered recorder humming, and the gentle rustle of dry grass under a sky too wide to embrace. Milo proved even more resourceful than I'd hoped. After a quick consult of his mental map, we had no signal for satellite imagery. He led us southwest, zigzagging through a disused irrigation channel that paralleled a windbreak of poplars. The trees once shielded corn from prairie gusts. Now their trunks leaned at odd angles, and their leaves, withered by drought and disease, crunched underfoot like dry paper. We moved crouched, water up to our shins in some stretches, but the reed-lined edges hid us from any eyes on the road. Milo carried a cracked plastic hand pump sprayer slung over one shoulder. It smelled faintly of ammonium phosphate, industrial fire retardant. He claimed the pink foam clogged an infected person's nasal passages and filmed their eyes long enough to buy 3, maybe 5 seconds in tight corridors. I'd never tested the theory, but the dried flecks on his cuffs suggested field research. Meanwhile, I lugged a faded Coast Guard duffel, spare cassettes, 2 D-cell bricks, Agnes's crowbar, hilt wrapped in medical tape, and one of Lorna's precious smoke canisters marked CS8R in her neat handwriting. An hour into the march, high noon heat cooked the stagnant ditch water, releasing a smell like boiled algae. Sweat stung my cracked ribs despite the early October chill. Signs of other travelers emerged. A tattered FEMA poncho flapping from barbed wire like a caution flag. Crawler tracks, slick dark streaks of heelless shuffling, leading toward a toppled rural mailbox. And, more ominous, a set of crisp boot prints pressed into the silt of the bank. Their edges hadn't softened from dew, meaning they were hours, not days, old. Milo crouched, traced a tread pattern with a gloved finger, and murmured, "Composite sole, not guard issue. Could be clean slate." The name tasted like iron on my tongue. At 15:42, Milo's cracked Nokia still managed military time. We gained a low hillock overlooking the clinic's rear loading area. Thin smoke curled from a side window. The linens we'd upended during the firefight had smoldered. probably igniting when stray tracer rounds hit disinfectant-soaked sheets. The swarm we'd left behind had thinned. Dozens must have chased the Cherokee toward the northern ridge. Still, about 20 infected loitered in the parking lot, drifting between shade patches like dead moths orbiting a porch light. A few pawed at the smashed entrance, drawn again and again by some memory of movement. We belly-crawled along a maintenance trench lined with broken PVC. Milo watched their pacing pattern, muttering counts under his breath. 8 seconds in shadow, 4 to cross sunlight, pivot, repeat. When our window came, I slipped through a wire mesh gate into the herb garden surrounding the chapel. Tomatoes had long rotted on vines, but rosemary bushes still scented the air, masking sweat. Milo stayed outside, eyes scanning the lot, finger ready on the sprayer trigger. Inside, the chapel smelled of wax and old copper. I ghosted the aisle we'd sprinted earlier, stepping over overturned cots and IV poles like hurdles. Some bodies twitched. Others lay still where belts had rotted through, wrists purple from earlier restraint. Their breaths rasped in dying throats, air moving without thought. I forced focus to the altar. The battery lantern was reduced to a red ember, but still illuminated the small envelope beneath a wooden cross, splashed with melted candle wax. The label, in Agnes's delicate hand, read, "For any who reclaim this place." I slid it between my chest and undershirt, feeling its papery edge press my sternum, someone else's testimony now beating against my heart. Turning to leave, a faint beep tickled my ear, the motion sensor chime still hanging by the door, now wired to a single 9-volt battery. A clever lure, the infected couldn't distinguish it, but panicked scavengers might trigger it and give themselves away. I pinched the battery clip, severing the loop. The silence felt like closing a wound. I met Milo at the garden gate, reunion smooth, almost too smooth in a world that seldom granted such grace. As we stepped toward the irrigation ditch, 3 men rose from behind a rust-spotted landscaping truck, rifles leveled, safety selectors already on single fire. No government insignia, just patchwork armor fashioned from volleyball knee pads, stitched to stovepipe slices. Their leader's hair was shaved on the sides, white square emblem painted dead center on black vest plate. His predator eyes flicked from Milo's shield to the bulging duffel. "Clinics under clean slate protection," he drawled. "Pay the toll to pass." Milo's whisper cut the air. Clean slate. Caleb had warned us. Raiders posing as rescuers around Dead Man Pass, sporting white squares as kill tags. I lowered the recorder mic, thumb hovering near stop, but refusing to silence evidence. "We want only passage," I said, forcing calm. The leader smirked, gestured with his muzzle toward Agnes's crowbar protruding from the bag. "Toll equals everything in that sack." I shook my head. He chambered around. The metallic clack echoed like a judge's gavel. Before he could aim, a russet blur erupted from the shrub line. Bailey, muzzle smeared with ditch mud, having doubled back on Caleb's scent trail. She slammed into the nearest raider, 40 kilos of shepherd mix toppling 80 kilos of man. Instinct yanked me sideways as the first shot cracked, unsuppressed thunder that would carry for miles. I crashed to one knee, tape deck hugged to chest. Milo roared, swung his pipe wrench overhead. It connected with another bandit's wrist, bone snapped with a splintering pop. The man screamed, rifle dropping. Leader panicked, fired once more, round whining past Milo's ear before Bailey's jaws clamped on his forearm, teeth piercing faux Kevlar like paper. He shrieked. I lunged, swung Agnes's crowbar in a tight arc. The steel ridge struck temple. He folded, unconscious before hitting gravel. Gunfire's echo rolled across the lot and awoke the building. Shattered chapel windows belched infected in hospital gowns, faces slack, eyes ignited by sound. They spilled like water over curbs. Milo grabbed my shoulder. "No second fight. Run!" He triggered the fire retardant sprayer behind us, leaving a cloud of sticky white foam that hissed on contact with warm flesh. I felt droplets spatter my neck as I vaulted the drainage ditch. We sprinted east along the gravel service road, Milo favoring one leg. Bullets sang behind, raiders firing wild, but guttural screams soon replaced gunshots as the tide of gowns reached them. I dared one glance. Clean slate men staggered under a feeding frenzy they'd summoned. I kept running. We didn't stop till sunset smeared the sky copper and pewter. My lungs burned. Every breath rattled damaged cartilage. We collapsed beneath a fallen wind turbine mast. Recorder still ticked, capturing our ragged gasps, the distant moans, the crackle of smouldering linens half a mile away. Raw proof of Clean Slate's reach, I mumbled. Milo nodded, but hissed in pain. Bullet graze along his calf sliced fabric and flesh. We limped on until twilight, finally spotting a rust-eaten tool shed embedded in a shelter belt of mulberry trees. Hinges protested, but the door wedged shut after we entered. While Bailey stood guard at the slit window, I disinfected Milo's wound with iodine wipes from Agnes's medkit, recording field notes as I worked. 3 male hostiles, mid-20s to mid-30s, composite sole boots, white square emblem, toll tactic near medical centers. Names unknown, more research needed. Milo winced yet managed a crooked grin. "Guess you were worth the detour, reporter," he muttered. I sealed the dressing and replied, "Let's survive the night before we judge the investment." A brittle dawn peeled back shadows. We crunched stale crackers for breakfast, then resumed the march toward the orchard. The miles felt longer, prairie silence oppressive, only the clatter of grasshoppers and the hiss of wind through half-dead corn. At noon, we crested a ridge, finally seeing the neat apple rows where our friends should be, but the Cherokee's tire tracks veered west, bypassing the orchard gate entirely. Heart sinking, we hurried down. The warehouse doors gaped, chain locks snapped. Inside, coil cables strewn like shed snakeskins, a toppled workbench, and one of Caleb's dog tags glinting beneath a skylight. Bailey sniffed everywhere, whining at corners. No blood, no bodies, just signs of hasty departure. On a cracked clipboard near the inverter, a single note in Caleb's block print. "Riley, Clean Slate Patrol circling Ridge Road. Had to roll early, taking Agnes and unit to Tower 17 via back logging track. Meet at relay or stay hidden. Keep tape safe." C. Relief flooded me. They were alive. Unease followed. Old logging paths were notorious for mudslides and blind switchbacks. Milo exhaled. "If they left at first light, they've gained at least 6 hours." I photographed the note for record, pocketed Caleb's tag, its edges warm against my skin. We debated strategy. Chasing could draw raiders toward Tower 17, jeopardizing Caleb's convoy. Milo volunteered to shadow the logging route from a flank, using his fire crew knowledge of ravines to spot ambushes. He'd signal with 3 short bursts on a borrowed handheld if he intercepted trouble. I weighed my role and realized east lay the interstate bus depot, rumor swollen with stranded evacuees, potential goldmine of testimony. If I gathered their stories, Tower 17's first reborn broadcast could amplify voices beyond our own scars. Bailey pressed against my thigh, sensing decision time. I stroked her ears. "Looks like just us again," I whispered. Her tail swished once, firmening my resolve. We scavenged every crate, 2 dented cans of peaches, 1 box of crackers still crisp, a half-full propane cylinder, and, minor miracle, a replacement belt the exact width for my cassette drive. Milo loaded spare 308 rounds into his pouch, then shook my hand, grip rough but steady. "If the tower lights up in 3 days, I'll know you made it," he said. I replied, "And if I hear 3 clicks on 462,675, I'll know you need a rescue." Agreement sealed. He limped north along the power line easement, silhouette shrinking among pylons. I shouldered the duffel, Bailey trotting beside, and stepped onto the cracked frontage road. Ahead, the skyline bristled with derelict coach buses, steel leviathans frozen mid-exodus. The sun dipped behind orchard silhouettes, throwing long shadows that stretched ahead like beckoning fingers. I clicked record, swore softly never to let those shadows swallow the stories entrusted to me, and kept walking east. I speak now from a drainage culvert half a mile south of Interstate 21. Buses sit ahead like beached whales, windows smeared with the dust of 9 months' neglect. Tower 17 is silent. I won't know if Caleb succeeded for at least another day. I carry Sister Agnes's envelope, Milo's radio macros, and all the words you've heard. Bailey and I walk light. Tomorrow, I'll approach the depot. I heard once that a driver named Jonah Reed survived those first terrible hours on his route, kept a busload alive by wits and grit until fear turned passengers against each other. If he still lives, I need his story. Panic spreads faster than infection, and the world should remember that. For now, the prairie wind slips through culvert ribs like the breath of something enormous sleeping beneath. Bailey curls at my feet, ears twitching to every distant shuffle. I unspool a fresh tape, ready to click record the moment a new voice accepts a can of peaches for truth. Until then, it's just me, the dog, and the road humming under a sky that refuses silence. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.